Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep today, going to be looking at Ross Atkins' The Art of Explanation.
Ooh, good one.
It's really packed with useful stuff
Yeah.
for anyone who wants to communicate better.
Absolutely.
Whether you're, working on a presentation, writing an important email, anything, really.
Yeah, or just, for life, just wanting to be a better communicator in general.
Totally. And what's so cool is one of the core ideas is inspired by, get this, a childhood game.
Oh.
Remember that game, Simon?
Oh, yeah, with the lights and sounds, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You had to repeat the sequences. Well, Atkins realized that this game, it perfectly illustrates a good explanation. You break down complex information into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Makes sense. Like you're building a bridge, right?
Yeah.
Between what your audience already knows and what you're trying to explain. And each step kind of builds on the last one.
Exactly. Creates a clear path, easy to follow.
Yeah.
And that brings us to Atkins's 10 Commandments of Explanation. These are his criteria for good communication. Now, we don't have time to go through all 10.
Right.
But let's hit some highlights.
Okay.
One that really stuck with me was no distractions. So Atkins, he used to use a lot of on-screen graphics in his videos.
Yeah, it's tempting.
Yeah.
These visuals.
Totally. But he noticed that viewers would get distracted if the graphic wasn't related to what he was saying at that moment.
Yeah, it makes sense. You lose people
Yeah.
if it's not directly connected.
So he started removing them
Interesting.
when they weren't in use to make sure that focus stayed on the message.
I like that. It's like decluttering, right? But for your explanation. And it makes you think it's not just visuals, it's anything distracting. Like, have you ever gotten those emails that are just so long with so much irrelevant stuff?
Oh, all the time. My inbox is a nightmare.
Right. And you find yourself like zoning out halfway through.
Totally. Just skim.
It's because they haven't taken the time to kind of, clear out those distractions.
Yeah. Get to the point.
Exactly.
And it makes you realize you really have to respect your audience's time
For sure.
and attention. And speaking of respecting your audience, another commandment that stood out was useful.
Okay. Yeah.
So Atkins really believes in thinking about your audience's questions in advance. He even makes a list of every question he thinks he might get asked.
Wow.
And then he carefully crafts his explanation to address them all.
That's dedication. It makes sense, though, right?
Yeah.
You're not just throwing information out there. You're actually considering what they need to know.
Yes, it goes beyond just answering questions. It's about understanding their needs.
Right.
And tailoring your explanation for them.
Yeah. And that's not always easy.
It's not.
We've all been in those situations where we just start explaining without really thinking about who we're talking to.
Oh, all the time.
Have you ever had that experience where you just felt like you're talking at someone rather than with them?
Oh, yeah. It's like you're so in your own head.
Exactly.
And you completely forget about the other person.
Right. And actually, there's a story in the book that kind of illustrates this perfectly. Atkins talks about his time hosting a show on British Airways in-flight radio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Captive audience, right.
Right. He had to talk about cultural events, but he went into way too much detail.
Ah, I see. Assuming they needed like a comprehensive guide,
Exactly.
but people on a plane, they're probably tired.
Exactly. They might just want to relax.
Right. Or they have their own things they're doing.
Exactly. The last thing they need is a lecture.
So it shows that what works in one situation might not work in another.
Context is everything.
Yeah. So we've talked about distractions, making sure our explanations are useful, and tailoring them to our audience. But what about when we're the ones feeling overwhelmed? By information, I mean. When you're trying to process so much and you feel like your brain's going to explode.
Oh, yeah. Happens all the time.
Any advice from Atkins on that?
Well, he actually has a 7-step process. But one that's really helpful is the ball mill analogy. Imagine you have this big, giant drum.
Okay.
And you put all your information inside. Then you add these steel balls.
Steel balls.
Yeah, and you spin the drum.
Okay, I'm picturing it. What happens?
The information gets ground down, just like ore in a mill,
I see.
into smaller pieces.
Yeah.
And then you can use those pieces to build your explanation.
So you're like identifying what's truly essential
Yeah.
and discarding the rest.
Exactly. And then once you've broken everything down,
Right.
you got to start putting those pieces back together.
Yeah, how do we do that?
2 questions that Atkins emphasizes are, what's the source? And really,
Right.
the first one, what's the source? It's all about being critical. Just because something is presented as a fact doesn't mean it is.
Right. Got to check the source.
Yeah, where is it coming from? Is there bias?
And the second question, really?
Yeah.
That's about trusting your gut.
Yeah.
Like if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't.
Exactly.
Which is where a second opinion can be so helpful.
Oh, absolutely.
Bounce your ideas off someone else, get a different perspective.
Like a built-in BS detector.
Exactly. So we've talked about purpose, knowing our audience, organizing information.
The foundation.
Yeah, the basics. But how do we go beyond that?
Good question.
How do we craft a really compelling narrative?
Well, Atkins dives into that, the art of verbal explanation.
Okay.
He talks a lot about practice and mastering your delivery, and he makes these really interesting connections to music and performance.
Oh, I love that. Tell me more.
Okay, so he says that a good explanation is like a well-composed song.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
It has rhythm, it flows, each element connects to the next.
It's like storytelling.
Yeah.
You want to captivate your audience.
Exactly. And Atkins has some specific techniques for this. One is the dial test.
Dial text. I'm not familiar with that one.
So Atkins learned about this from the BBC. They had this thing where audience members would use dials to, like, rate their engagement.
Ooh, interesting. Like during a radio show.
Yeah, so the producers could actually see where people were tuning in and where they were tuning out.
That's amazing.
It is.
It's like real-time feedback.
Exactly. And this became really important for Atkins' own work. He's always thinking, where might I lose someone? What can I do to keep them hooked?
So he's anticipating those moments and trying to prevent them.
Exactly. And one thing he focuses on is pacing and flow.
Okay.
Like a good song has a mix of fast and slow parts. A good explanation needs variety too.
So it's not just about keeping things interesting, it's about making the information stick.
Right. And that brings us to another point, finding your own voice.
Oh, that's so important.
It is. Atkins shares a story about getting advice from another broadcaster, Dotun Adebayo.
Okay.
He said, don't try to sound like anyone else. Embrace your own style.
That's great advice. Be authentic, be genuine.
Exactly. And that's what makes your explanations relatable.
Yeah, people connect with that. So we've got compelling narratives, finding our voice. But what about when things go off script?
Oh, yeah, the curveballs.
Exactly. Like someone asks an unexpected question or you're put on the spot.
Happens all the time.
How do you stay calm in those moments?
Well, that's where Atkins' strategies for dynamic explanations come in.
Okay, I need to hear these.
One of his big recommendations is to think like the questioner. So before you go into a presentation or a meeting, try to anticipate what questions might come up.
Okay.
Put yourself in their shoes. What are they thinking? What are their concerns?
That makes sense.
What might they be curious about?
Yeah, think about those things ahead of time.
That way you'll feel much more prepared if you get a tough question.
But what about when you get a question you just didn't expect at all?
Yeah. This can be tricky.
Something that throws you completely off guard.
Atkins has a great technique for that.
Oh.
He calls it mirroring language.
Mirroring language. What's that?
It's basically reflecting the questioner's words back at them.
So you're kind of repeating what they said.
Not exactly. It's more about, echoing their phrases
Wow.
to show that you're really listening.
And to give yourself a moment to think.
Exactly. It buys you a little time to, gather your thoughts
Right.
before you respond.
Okay.
And if you're really stuck, he suggests having some what he calls escape phrases ready.
Escape voices.
Yeah. These are ways to transition smoothly away from topics you're not comfortable with.
I see.
So you can steer the conversation back to something you're more confident about.
It's like redirecting.
Exactly. It's all about staying in control, even in those, unexpected moments.
It reminds me of that story in the book where Atkins is doing a live TV phone-in, but his earpiece breaks.
Oh, no.
Talk about pressure. But he manages to stay calm and keep the show going.
Wow. That takes some serious skill.
It does.
It really shows how important it is to, be adaptable in those situations.
For sure. So we've talked about all these great techniques for explaining things in detail, but let's switch gears a bit.
Okay.
What about those times when you need to explain something quickly?
Ah, yes, the quick explanation. Very important in today's world.
Right. We're all so busy.
Exactly. We're bombarded with information, drowning in emails.
It's information overload.
Totally. So how do we make sure our message gets through?
Yeah, when you only have a few seconds to grab someone's attention.
Well, one principle Atkins talks about is BLUF.
BLUF.
It stands for bottom line up front.
Okay.
Tell me more.
It's a technique used by the U.S. military.
Oh, wow.
where clear communication is obviously super important.
Right, in high-stakes situations.
Exactly. The idea is you state your main point right away at the very beginning.
So, no more burying the lead. Get straight to the point.
Exactly. It shows respect for the reader's time.
Right, because let's be honest, most of us are just skimming our emails these days.
Totally. We're all so busy.
And if the key information's not right there at the top, we'll probably miss it.
Exactly. And to make it even easier on the reader.
Make sure your email is easy to skim.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Use short paragraphs, bullet points.
Yes, those are helpful.
Headings. Anything that breaks up the text.
So it's more visually appealing.
Exactly. Make it easy on the eyes. And one thing Atkins really hates is what he calls unkind taxes.
Unkind taxes. I've never heard that before.
He's talking about those big group emails, where someone blasts a message out to 20 people.
Oh, I know those emails.
Whether it's actually relevant to everyone or not.
Yeah, those drive me crazy.
Right.
You open your inbox and there's this huge email chain. You're like, why am I even on this?
Right. It's just noise.
Exactly. So what's the alternative?
Be more mindful.
Okay.
Make sure every email you send is targeted.
So think carefully about who you're sending it to.
Yes, and why.
And what you want them to get out of it.
Exactly. Quality over quantity.
It all comes back to respecting your audience.
It does. It's about being thoughtful and intentional with your communication.
I love that. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from detailed explanations to quick and concise ones.
Yeah, we've gone from giving a TED Talk to writing a tweet.
Exactly. But what about when you need to remember a lot of information yourself?
Oh, good question. If you're prepping for a presentation.
Right.
And you need to have all those facts and figures at your fingertips.
Are there any techniques in the book that can help with memory and recall?
There is one. It's called the Memory Palace.
The Memory Palace. I've heard of that, but I always thought it was for memory champions.
It's actually an ancient technique that anyone can use.
Really?
Yeah. You basically visualize a familiar location.
Okay.
And you associate different pieces of information with different spots in that location.
So you're creating these mental images.
Right.
That connect to a specific place.
Exactly. It makes it much easier to remember things later on.
Wow. It's fascinating.
It's like building your own personal Google search engine in your mind.
Okay. I'm definitely going to try that. So we've covered a lot of ground today. From the importance of eliminating distractions to the power of the word and.
You noticed that.
I did.
I guess it shows how those techniques can really become second nature.
They do. Well, it all comes back to that idea that effective communication is a skill.
Right.
Anyone can learn it. Anyone can improve with practice.
Absolutely. And Atkins's book is a great place to start.
It really is. So what's the big takeaway you hope people listening will walk away with today?
For me, it's that communication is about more than just getting your point across. It's about building connections, fostering understanding, and making a positive impact.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I want to encourage everyone listening to check out The Art of Explanation for themselves.
Yes, do it.
It's full of practical tips that will help you become a more confident communicator in every aspect of your life. And before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a little challenge inspired by that Memory Palace technique we were talking about.
Okay, I like it.
So think of a place that you know really well. It could be your childhood home, your favorite park, even just your daily commute. Anywhere that's familiar.
Yeah, somewhere you can easily picture in your mind.
Exactly. And now imagine you're walking through that space and you're placing different pieces of information, things you want to remember in different spots.
So you're assigning a piece of information to the front door, another one to the kitchen table, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's a fun way to make those abstract ideas a little more concrete.
Yeah, and it uses the power of visual memory.
Right. It might sound a little strange, but trust me, it works. So give it a try. You might be surprised at how much you can remember.
I'm going to try it.
Me too. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap things up for today.
Yeah, this was a great discussion.
It really was. We covered so much ground, but it all comes back to that core idea that anyone can become a better communicator.
Absolutely.
It just takes practice and the right tools. So if you're looking to up your communication game, definitely check out Roz Atkins, The Art of Explanation.
It's packed with great advice.
It really is. And thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.